This week on Buffering, we are joined by Bridget Watkins, Area Vice President of Success at Calix, who has been helping service providers elevate their subscriber experience with more than 20 years in the industry. Today, we will talk about how you can move from a utility to a broadband experience provider.
Bridget, we are thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for letting me join you.
It's awesome to see you here. Obviously, we have a long history together. I actually used to work for you for, what was it? Probably 2 or 3 years, I think. Two or three wonderful years. It was probably like the best 2 or 3 years of your career, right?
Yep.
As kind of an introduction to the episode today, we're going to go in a bunch of different directions, but I thought it would be good to start. And I realized this as I was about 3/4 of the way listening to our last episode with Scott Goff from Gibson, where we were talking about value-based offers or VBOs. And I was listening to that episode and I went, crap, we never really explained what a value-based offer is, which was sort of problematic. And we're going to, again, touch on this a little bit later in the episode today. But we'd love to hear your perspective on what you think about when you hear value-based offer and what your team has been doing to kind of help broadband service providers become broadband experience providers and make this transition.
Yeah. So, I think the important thing is it's in the name. Historically, as an industry, we've been horrible about trying to sell technology to people who don't understand the definitions of the things that we're selling. We talk about megabits and gigabits and Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 6 and 5Gs, and they have no idea what any of it means. And so it's really a repositioning of the things that we provide to meet the needs of a customer or a consumer. And so it's saying, how does this actually bring value to someone's life? And let's talk about it like that. So it's essentially just changing the way we're telling our story.
Yep, I love that. And it aligns so well to what Scott told us last week. And the clip that I kind of chunked out of our podcast last week with Scott was the fact that they didn't change their actual offers. They just changed the way they were talking about their offers. And that was so perfect to me and aligns perfectly to what you were saying there around value and what value means to the subscriber.
Absolutely.
So speaking of telling stories, Bridget, in the intro, I mentioned that you have more than 20 years in the industry. Can you walk us through both your time at Calix and your time before Calix?
Yeah, you bet. So yes, I think this is technically year 28. So it's been a little bit of time. I've had the opportunity to work both for service providers. I worked as a consultant for about 10 years, helping customers with marketing strategy, competitive strategies, business development, transformation. And, it's a long-term topic. I actually first learned about Calix when I was consulting and then ended up working for a service provider who used Calix solutions. And so became more familiar with them at that time. I joined Calix in the marketing team and then moved over to the success team a couple years into my tenure here. So this is year 7 for me at Calix, and just delighted to be able to be in a role with a success organization where I get to work with companies and customers, some of whom I've known for a very long time now, and kind of help them on their next stage of the journey.
I love that, Bridget. So many of my customers not only know Gabe, but they know you as well. So it's always fantastic to have those connections in the industry as well.
Yes,
Bridget
it is.
Was when I was in Success, before we even frankly called it Success.
Yeah.
Bridget, you and I worked closely together when you were at the Broadband Service Provider. So you and I go way back even to prior to your time here at Calix.
Yes,
I was so happy when you joined us here. And then when you moved over into the Success organization and ultimately became my boss, and I'm not just sucking up to you, I was really happy about that as well.
Either way, it's just been an incredible opportunity to be able to take all of those years of experience and learnings and help new companies in a different way. So I've really enjoyed it.
So, talking about those value-based offers a little bit, I want to
Yeah,
set the vision with our listeners as well, and really
sure.
lean into the term broadband experience provider. That's something I mentioned at the top of the episode as well. But why is it so important that we kind of move past the network, think beyond the network, and focus on that connected experience?
Yeah. Well, the reality is the experience that your customer has as a service provider is formed by what we call moments that matter. And that happens everything from the way that you've designed your network to work. It happens when you make your first phone call to the company. It happens when they tell you how long you have to wait for your install. It happens in the offers that you're provided. And it happens in the way that follow up happens after you become a customer. So it's not just about calling somebody and getting a utility delivered. It's about understanding that their holistic experience is a continuum of all these little touch points that they've had with your company leading up to the moment of becoming a customer and staying a customer.
That's great. And one thing I think I want to talk about a little bit too today
Yeah,
is data rate units. Bridget, you know how much I love data rate units, megabits per second, gigabits per second. I always call these legacy selling techniques, and that's really what I see that as. I mean, I think it's been mentioned that the way we've sold the internet hasn't changed from even the '90s to
it hasn't.
present day.
Yeah,
And we're really focused on, oh, do I need 1 gig? Do I need 500 meg? Again, totally meaningless to your average consumer. So this is where we kind of brought in those value-based offers. And there's three of us on this call here today, and I kind of want to like go through each of us, but we might all have at least 1 gig service, but we've got three very different personas or very different lifestyles. And when we have those lifestyles, buying a package or a value-based offer that's tailored to each of our individual personas is fantastic. I've always said I've got the connected home or the tech-savvy household, the Wi-Fi electric blanket, the Wi-Fi lights. I was reading a joke just before this podcast when I was thinking of an icebreaker question, and I was trying to think of what the personality of my Wi-Fi would be, and I saw a comment here using AI, and it was talking about how you panic when your fridge has a software update. And I thought, what better, lifestyle for me? But that's kind of where I sit. The tech, I've got a 2 gigabit per second package. I don't tell people outside the industry that I've got a 2 gig package because again, that's not very meaningful to them. But Bridget, how would you describe your household? What is your value-based offer?
yeah. For me, it revolves around two things: being able to work and not have problems connecting with people because I work virtually. And then being able to enjoy the times when I'm not working by connecting and being able to stream without buffering, being able to have service in my backyard where I like to spend a lot of time. So, to your point, I've got a gig. Um, my problem comes more from the fact that my service provider has data limits. And this was fascinating to me. So my package comes with 1 terabyte of data, and I sometimes exceed that in a household of two people, neither of whom game, but because I work from home and I stream data back and forth all day long. And so it's mind blowing to me when I have to pay an overage because I've gone over 1 terabyte of data. So from a techie standpoint, that's really getting into the nitty gritty of things our customers don't understand. So I think you're exactly right. It's as long as I can work and then enjoy my after work, either watching TV or streaming out in my backyard. That's what I need it to do.
I want to get to Gabe here in a second, but there's one thing you mentioned there, streaming in your backyard. It's funny, it's springtime where I live in the mountains. So
Yeah,
we finally have the sun out. And I went over to my sister's house the other day where I had installed an outdoor unit. And sure enough, the sun was out and she was watching Netflix out in the backyard. So seeing that use
absolutely.
case, outside of like the IoT devices, I love that you brought that up. But Gabe, your persona, what is your value-based offer?
Yeah, I'll share mine here in a sec, but I do just want to go back to something Bridget mentioned there around the usage cap and getting an additional bill, it brings me back to something that we talked about with John Pico on the episode that we did with him a few weeks ago around peaks and valleys. I'll bet when you got a bill for going over your usage cap, we would probably call that a valley. Yes?
Yeah, I wasn't super happy.
I'm sure you were not super happy. And when you're thinking about customer experience and becoming a broadband experience provider, what are the things we want to do? We want to avoid valleys and we want to create more peaks. And so if you're creating a valley by creating that bad customer touch point of, okay, you just got slapped with an overage bill, nobody wants that. Nobody likes that. And is it really worthwhile for the $10, $15, $20 more? Yeah, there you go. Right. But was it really worth that $10 to create a negative customer experience where I'm sure we're not the only person that you've told about that it's, come up in day-to-day conversations with, friends or family or whatever. And I'm sure you've had a negative there are additional negative customer experiences that have happened from that. So anyway, I just wanted to hit on that because I thought that was a really interesting point, Bridget.
Well, let me just hop on that real quick because I think you make a really important point. It ties back to what we're talking about being an experience provider, because it becomes a combination of all these little touch points. So how many positive things have to happen between me and my service provider before I've forgotten that they charged me that $10 overage fee? Great. And what happens if my only interaction with them is a few months of me exceeding my limit? At what point do I start looking for options instead of saying, you know what? Yeah, my service is pretty solid, but all my interactions with you lately make me feel sad.
That's such a great point. And it's something that I think we see a lot is that the transactional touch points are the most frequent touch points versus where can I create those just little moments of delight or even communicating with somebody in a way that makes them feel not like you're taking advantage of them and creating, again, those positive customer experiences. So that's a really, really good point. And again, one I think that our industry doesn't always do the best job of is creating those opportunities, to have that positive customer experience.
Yeah.
So going back to my own home, I mean, Zach and I have talked about this before. Bridget, I would say I probably fall closest to you in probably a little closer to you than Zach, or maybe in between, because I do have all the connected devices. I've even got my little connected heater out here for when it's cold during the wintertime, and I want to turn it on before I walk out into a I say freezing cold office. I know, Zach, it's not actually like really freezing.
What is it, 50 degrees? Or
yeah, it's like 50. It's freezing cold. It's so cold. Yes, so cold. But anyway, and then, I also work remotely. So making sure that I have, rock solid connectivity for all of that is super important to me. And then, Bridget, you've got grandkids coming over. I've got my kids that are living with me, and obviously trying to make sure that they're protected from the terrifying world that is the internet. So from that perspective, I think we're probably a little bit similar, especially as your grandkids get more devices and probably bring those devices to your home. That adds another layer of concern that you want to add on to your overall service as well. But again, it's through none of this did we really talk about speed. It's about the things that we're doing with the service that we purchased. And to go back to your previous comment, Bridget, that's the value that person is going to place on it, is the things that they're doing with the service, not the, oh, great news, I have fiber. It's that part of it is pretty irrelevant.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny, I've been out of town for the last few days, and even away from home, the thing that adds value for me. So my Arlo cameras, I was able to peek in on my dog to make sure the dog is doing okay while I'm not at home. And that's what I think about from an experience standpoint. It's allowing those points of connection, even when you're not at your house. But technology is enabling that.
That's such a great point. I think about that one a lot too, because I too have Arlo cameras at my home, and the one on my front door, when I'm traveling, I love to see when the kids go to school in the morning, when they come home. It makes me feel like I still have that connectivity to home, even though I'm not there. And both of us travel for work, and we have to be away from home from time to time. And so feeling like you have that connection to home still makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
It's funny, a quick story here, and then I want to move on, but the connected home, during college once, one of my siblings and I were in college at the same time, and and we were fortunate enough to live at a house my parents owned, and they had an Arlo camera on the door. And with that, my mom loves her back to school photos. So while my siblings back home in Montana were taking their back to school photos, we ring the doorbell and got our photo taken as well. So we love that connected lifestyle. But
I'm just picturing Zach like holding one of those signs. I'm Zach.
This is what I want to be when I grow
21.
up.
It's my 15th year.
Marketer when I grow up. Yeah, that would be amazing.
That's amazing.
That picture.
Oh gosh, that was before I met Gabe, so I didn't know what I was getting myself into back then.
I want to learn Excel. Yeah, it's like, we need all those things on Zach's little chalkboard.
Oh my gosh. Well, when we talk about a broadband service provider and that transformation into a broadband experience provider, there's a few impacts on your organization. And that's what I want to talk about next. But to kind of sum up what we've talked about here, and speed and price, no longer doing that. We're talking about value-based offers. The tech-centric messaging, those data rate units we love so much, we're changing that and using the lifestyle benefit and storytelling. Calling in for support. Let's be proactive, have our proactive options, have that app in your hand for that digital first engagement. And then this is a big one too, I love talking about, but those internal silos, when you become a broadband experience provider, this is not one department doing it by themselves. This is a collection of your cross-functional departments working together and having this transformation. So that's kind of summing up everything we just talked about. But before I hand it over to Gabe here, let's talk about the mobile app. Bridget, I know since I've started here at Calix, one of the things we've always talked about is the Command IQ app, or that having that mobile application. Why is that mobile app? Can you share with our listeners why that's so important to our broadband experience transformation?
Absolutely. I think it gives customers visibility into their Wi-Fi experience. We call it the remote control for your Wi-Fi. And I think it's so true, whether or not you use it a lot, to be able to have that touch point, if you do have a problem, or if there is an intrusion into your home network block, to be able to see that happened and go, oh, wow, I had no idea. We've seen a huge spike lately in viruses. And so being able to see how you're being protected in your home as you're using your services, I think is tremendously valuable. For people that have kids or grandkids, being able to set up content controls or parameters about when the internet can be used, it just puts power in people's hands to take that experience the next step further to meet the needs of their household. Because while we talk about value-based offers, we typically talk about them for a segment of people. But within that segment, each individual user may have different things that they care about. The app is what allows them to completely personalize that experience for the way that their household uses the internet.
Yeah, I love that point. And I think about even my own household. Bridget, I suspect yours is probably similar. I suspect you're the technology person in your home, much like I am the technology person in my home. So I have that experience with the app, with all of these things, because I'm doing it in my home. I suspect you're probably doing the same. And your husband has a different experience. My wife has a different experience, but we're still personalizing it to how they feel comfortable and how they approach technology.
Absolutely.
Not to disparage your husband and his lack of technology adoption, but I just know where you are.
Pretty
and I
techy
suspect
too, but he's happy to let me take care of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Gabe, just so you know, I manage the tech in my household as well. So I agree with you all here.
Well, I think the other thing I want to touch on that you said, Zach, is, even this, when we talk about transformation, it's not something that happens within one team. And it's not something that's the same for every customer. So when I think about my ideal experience, it means I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't have to call into order service. I don't have to call in for support. I don't have to stop in an office. I don't have to have somebody come to my house. I can do it through chat or text message or self-install. And so while for some people that may seem counterintuitive, that's not an experience, it's not a white glove. For me, it is. I've bought my last 2 cars through text message because I didn't want to have to go to a dealership and talk to somebody. They just bring it to me and then I sign papers electronically. And so, I think it's also recognizing that the people who want the service, we should be able to meet them where they are. So it's about providing choice, not saying this is the only one single way that we can do this thing. It's about saying, what are all the ways we can do these things, and which ones are we able to support in a way that makes sense?
I'm so glad you said that, because you're right. Like our customers especially want to be able to have that personal relationship with their customers. So many of the folks we work with are local providers in the area, and they want to have that white glove service. And that's awesome. And there are many people who want that, but there's also the convenience factor. And I think we sometimes make assumptions about people based on age demographics and things like that. We have 3 different generations represented on this call.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us would assume that Zach and his generation are going to want that, that ability to just do self-serve. But you and I also want that as well, mostly just out of convenience, because we've got busy lives and we want to be able to deal with it when we can deal with it, not have to be to the, oh my gosh, Zach, what was it? The 12-hour window that the company had to come to
the 12-hour window. Not only that, Gabe, but do you remember when I moved my broadband service, I had to call in. I complained about that too. Yeah. I was upset.
Yeah, you were. Yeah. Yes, you just wanted to be able to deal with it and move, and frankly, that's something that you probably should have been able to do. Like, that's not that complicated a transaction. So yes, giving people the choice and meeting them where they are, I think is a great point there, Bridget.
Yeah.
So shifting topics here a little bit to another item that I know you've been involved a lot with, not only here at Calix, but also in prior lives, and that's organizational alignment. And I'm not saying we're perfect at Calix. There's many things that we can be doing better, but I do feel like one of the things that we do well is having sales, marketing, success, operations, a lot of other groups within our organization aligned really well and not working in isolation. And when we think about this from a broadband service provider perspective, unfortunately, what we see oftentimes is a lot of us versus them mentality of, I hesitate to even say this, but I hear it all of the time, so I will just say it. The guys in the field, the girls in the office, like I'm sure you've heard that a million times, Bridget, and it unfortunately creates that division and misalignment from an organization perspective. So I'd love to hear your perspective around how you address those challenges, even when you were working for a BSP, and then how you've started to address those as well as you're working with broadband service providers or experience providers in your work here at Calix.
Yeah, so I think the thing about transformation that sometimes people stumble over is that it sounds like a big, scary word. And really what transformation is it's small changes and steps along the way to get to the point where you're trying to go. I don't ever feel like transformation is done. So it's not like a one-time event. So it's kind of taking that step back to say, okay, what does transformation look like for us? And what are the tiny steps that we need to take? And what becomes really important in this to organize, to get everybody aligned around that is to say, okay, this is the why. This is why we're going to be changing some things. This is why it's important to our business and our survival and why we have to do it now. This is your role as an individual in this process to really share that what's in it for me. So not only from a personal standpoint, how am I contributing to the success of the organization, but also why do I care? And so I think being able to really talk specifically about those things is so critically important, because then it flows back into those moments that matter that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. What are the touch points and who owns those? Because it's every single person in the company that impacts those touch points. And as long as they understand what their role is in that time and place and how it connects to the moments that are before and after that, it helps create more synergy within the team when everybody's working towards the same goal. It's not, no, my job is only this narrow little piece. Nope, it's not. Your job is the same end thing that is everybody else's job. And this is how all the pieces of that puzzle fit together.
Couldn't agree more. It's such a good perspective. I heard you talk about this a little bit at the event you and I were at earlier this week. And those touch points around, or the points you made there around, really making sure to explain to people why this change is necessary is so important to get that buy-in across the organization. Not only what with them, what is in it for them, but again, why? If you're just asking people to change and transform, they're going to be resistant to that. And even after they hear the why, they still may be resistant, but at least you've given them a good reason. It's not just, we talked about this, Zach, the power of because in marketing, and it's the same thing when you're, if I ask my kid to take out the trash and just, ask him to do it without giving him an explanation, he's probably less likely to do it versus because then I will give you your allowance, or because then I will not be mad at you, or because I really want you to help out around the house a little bit more. But at least you're giving them a specific reason as to why. And that why becomes super important when you're asking for, that organizational alignment and transformation. Another point you made there that I thought was really interesting is that transformation is a continuum and not something that's like ever done. I do wonder if that's a big reason why people just get scared to not do anything, because it's almost like you can't see the end state, because if you start down this path of transformation, then you're just going to have to continue to transform versus, it's just easier for me not to do anything because then I don't have to continue to do the work.
I think it's really true. And I think that's why it's so important to say, what is one thing that I think we could do better? And let's start with that as a company. And I think one of the ways that you build that buy-in is by having the team be part of the solution. Okay, this is how we're doing it today. We don't feel like this is providing a great experience. What are your ideas for the ways that we could make this better? Think across the business. What are all the things that we could do? So they're not limited to only looking at it from their perspective, but being able to look at it from others' perspectives within the organization to say, you know what, I've always wondered why we do it this way. What if we did this instead? And that helps build kind of that groundswell of interest and buy-in and getting everybody to make sure that we're all going in the same direction.
I genuinely don't know the answer to this question, but I'm just going to ask it because I'm curious what you did when you were at a BSP. Did you make people go do other people's jobs or like ride along with them with other people's jobs?
We did job shadowing. So we had a program where, we scheduled it out because we didn't want it to be disruptive to the business.
Sure.
I did it myself. I went with Tex. I had my coveralls on. I crawled under the crawl space of the house to demonstrate that I was willing to do it. Once. That was good for me.
Once was good enough for you.
Yeah.
Hey, you did it once, so
I did. I understood some of the challenges they were facing after doing it. But that ability to walk in their shoes is so important. And it's everything from listening to the conversations on the phone, whether it's a customer calling to request service or whether it's a customer calling with a problem. And then also understanding what happens out there in the field and the situations that people are in and what they can observe when they're in someone's home that might open the doors for new opportunities. So yeah, I think it's a critically important part of transformation is making space to understand what other people in your organization are doing every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, what they're dealing with. One of my favorite things whenever I go visit a provider is just to go sit in the call center for just like a couple hours and just listen to the conversations. And, obviously you can only see or hear one side of the conversation, but once they hang up, you can be like, hey, tell me a little bit about how that call went and what happened there. And it's amazing, one, just the variety of calls that come in, but two, how much you can learn in a relatively short period of time about the challenges that particular group, which is oftentimes the front line of the organization, right? That's that first touch point with the customer is dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. There's so much diversity in what comes in. Mm-hmm. It's a very valuable data gathering point for lots of the things that companies do.
Yeah. So transitioning a little bit to, some kind of thinking about, what people are measuring, those sorts of things. I think all the time about something that our former boss, Martha, always used to say, if you don't track it, it's just a hobby. And I see you chuckling because I'm sure you've heard her say that 9,000 times.
Yes,
and
I have.
as have I. And that was something that I really took away from, working with her and working for her was, making sure that we're measuring, what it is that we're actually doing. I know you talked a little bit about smart measurement, I think as well yesterday, correct? If I'm remembering
I did,
correctly.
yeah.
It was a long day yesterday, so I'm trying to remember all of the things that were discussed on a long travel day. But I'd love to hear your perspective on like that smart measurement,
Yeah.
and how broadband experience providers should be tracking success and what they should be thinking about from a metrics perspective.
It's interesting. So last week, had a conversation with a customer and this came up. And it was really insightful because they said, as we're becoming an experience provider, we're coming to the realization that we have to measure things differently. It's not about how fast is the install. It's about, did we do it right? And did we have to go back because we didn't? It's about things like, instead of saying, how fast were we able to get off the phone? It's, did we resolve their issue on the first call? And were we able to help them? And do they feel good about the way that we're leaving the interaction? And they said some of the things that you do as an experience provider are in conflict with the way that we've measured our business historically. And I thought that was really important to acknowledge. When you're going through a transformation exercise, it's really important to say, what are the things we're trying to do and how do we measure that? And it might mean you look at things differently. Mm-hmm. I certainly think there are still things that are really important, like how long are your customers waiting on hold when they call you? First call resolution we talked about. What are your scheduling windows? How long of an open window are they giving you? Or is it an appointment time?
Yeah.
How long do they have to wait for an installation? Is it 2 days? Is it 6 weeks? Do you have the ability for them to do a self-install? And then I think from an experience standpoint, it's measuring transactional CSAT. When they have that interaction with you, are you trying to capture their sentiment? And then looking at NPS, not as a score, but as an opportunity to collect data to help you figure out what those next steps in your transformation look like. So while there's a lot of traditional metrics that are really important, you can't measure everything, nor should you try. But that's why it's important to say, what are we actually trying to deliver? And what are the things that I can measure that tell us whether we're doing those things or not?
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I think you're talking about the time spent on calls. It reminded me of a conversation I had with a customer a couple of weeks ago. They're a large provider in another country, and this particular country has an open access broadband platform where there are just broadband service providers selling over the top of this existing kind of fiber infrastructure. Right. And so it's a highly competitive market because the barrier for entry is relatively low, right? You don't have to actually build your own infrastructure. Right. You can just sell over the top of this infrastructure that already exists. And they have grown very rapidly. They've seen a ton of success, and they attribute a lot of that success to exactly what you were talking about. The amount of time that they spend talking to their customers, and they don't have a metric. It reminds me of Zappos, Zach. I know we've talked about that in the past, where if you spend more time with customer, that's great, especially if you're really solving a particular problem. When I was talking to this customer, they were telling me a story about, you bought a connected fridge and you can't figure out how to get pictures onto that connected fridge. Well, that's not our problem, really, right? But it's a technology problem that exists in your home. And as your technology provider, we are going to help you solve that. And so they will do that for people where, all right, well, tell me what brand it is. Let me actually look up the instructions, and then they'll go through and try and help somebody actually solve that problem. And their customer service scores are amazing, right? And in a very highly competitive market where it's very price sensitive, they've grown like crazy because they're willing to do those things. And again, they've decided that metric based on where they're at in that transformation journey is not something that's important to them. And I loved that perspective. I thought it was really interesting.
Well, I think it's fundamental to what we're talking about. In order to be an experience provider, you have to provide a differentiated experience. It can be everything from the way that you offer services, stop talking about technology and speeds and feeds, and start talking about experience. But then it's also what you deliver on the backside. Is it different levels of service response times, or the way that you handle phone calls when people come in? Because differentiation happens all along those touch points that we were talking about. It's not just one specific thing that you change and all of a sudden, you're focused on experience. It's about looking at the full picture. So I think that's such a great point.
Bridget, this is awesome. We really appreciate you joining us today. So much great information that you shared. If you think about like one, maybe two things for a broadband service provider who really wants to transition to a broadband experience provider, if they've listened to all this stuff today, there's a bunch of ideas that are probably kicking around in their brain. What are one or two things that they can really tangibly take away and take back to their business?
So I'm going to say two things. The first one is contact our success team and we'll help you figure out the right next step. The second thing is pick one thing. What is one thing as an organization you could do better? And start with that, because that's your first step on this transformation journey. You don't have to think about the big picture to get started. Just think about one thing you could do differently or better.
I thought about that yesterday at the end of the conference. You go to any conference and you find you've got pages full of notes probably that you've written down. You've got 15 things that you want to go back to your regular day job. And if you have 15, you're going to do 0. Like that's just the reality of the situation.
Absolutely.
You need to pick that one or two that you can go back and really sink your teeth into. And I think that's great feedback on this conversation. Also, don't try and boil the ocean. What is it that you can focus on that just makes things a little bit better that day and then a little bit better the next day. And all of a sudden at the end of a period of time, you're going to have a lot of things fixed.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Bridget, for joining us on this episode of Buffering. I think we'll have to have you on maybe just after Connections here in 6 months, but thank you again. And thank you for everyone who's tuning into Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget, for more insights, be sure to connect with Gabe, Bridget, and I on LinkedIn.